Welcome to our community Bible study for Thursday, September the 30th. Our topic, we're continuing to read in the book of Genesis and the story of Jacob. We are reading Genesis chapter 32 and 33. And it's about Jacob returning home, but the title is Jacob Wrestles with God. Our main ideas are really about Jacob, his journey back to his family in Canaan after being away for 20 years, and how he continues to experience God's covenant that was originally given to Abraham, his grandfather, Isaac, his father, and now to him. He's very anxious to face his brother Esau because when the two of them parted 20 years before, Esau had threatened to kill him. Jacob wrestles with an angel one night. We'll talk about that. And then he's reunited with his family back in the promised land. So let's begin chapter 32. Jacob also went on his way as he left where he was with his relatives Laban. And the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Mahanaim, which is, I believe, Hebrew for two camps. So that was a special camp. I think the phrase, "the angels of God met him there," is very interesting and something we should think about. It is a reminder that this journey was not Jacob's alone, that leaving home and going and then finding not just one wife, but two, and having family and all those things, and then returning has been part of God's directing him in his life. And so it's not just his journey or his struggle, but it also reflects the guidance of God. And so here we have where the angels of God met him on the way at this stopping point on his way back from what is now Iraq back down to what we would call Israel today. He stops here in what is probably the northern part of the nation of Jordan, if you were looking at a map today. I don't know what those angels look like. We don't know anything about them, but it's interesting that in the Bible, there are different ways that people encounter God. Sometimes it is a voice, sometimes it is through a dream, sometimes it is identified as angels, sometimes it's identified as a man. We're going to read that in a few minutes. And sometimes, like with Moses, it's literally an encounter with God in a more experiential way. It's the way that people describe what that encounter was like for them. Sometimes it's for the choice of words. So here, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him to show him that he was headed the right direction. Verse 3, Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau." And especially in the Old Testament, we see this where a way to address people and approach people in a humble sense is to call them my lord, and to speak of yourself as your servant. So he says, "Tell my lord Esau, your servant Jacob says, I've been staying with Laban and have remained there until now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord that I may find favor in your eyes." When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he's coming to meet you. And 400 men are with him." And I think he may have been calmed by the angels earlier or comforted by them, but here his anxiety is through the roof. Why would he come with 400 men? So in great fear and distress, Jacob, who remembers that Esau had threatened to kill him, divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought, if Esau is coming and attacking one group, the other group that is left will have a chance to escape. Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I'll make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I've become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hands of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid he'll come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. So Jacob is praying to the Lord, saying, Lord, remember your promise to me. Please help me at this point in time. So Jacob spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau, and he was generous. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by themselves, so it was just goats in one and sheep in another, and said to his servants, go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds. So this was going to be a buffer, but also it was hopefully an incentive as a gift. So Jacob instructed the one in the lead, when my brother meets you and asks, who do you belong to and where you're going? And who owns all these animals in front of you? Then you are to say, they belong to my servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he's coming behind us. He also instructed the second and the third and all the others who follow the herds. You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I'm sending on ahead of me. Later, when I see him, perhaps he'll receive me. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he spent himself the night in the camp. Jacob was still so worried about his brother, and he was going to great lengths to try to pacify his brother so that perhaps his life could be spared. Well, Jacob is going to spend the night, and here it's verse 22. The subtitle here is Jacob Wrestles with God. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok River, headed towards Jordan and the land of Canaan. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, spending the night on the one side of the river. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it's daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. The man asked, what's your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. And then that was over. I want to stop here because this is the first use of the word Israel. And today we think of that as the nation of Israel, which is true. But it began by Jacob being called Israel, which means probably struggling with God, struggled with God. And so the nation of Israel began as Jacob, Israel, who eventually will have 12 sons, which will become the 12 tribes, which will be the defining people of Israel, who will even be called the Israelites along the way. So that's where that name comes from. It's interesting, the whole thing about names. And you know that names often describe actions, and here struggling is the name that goes with that. The other thing was Jacob wanted the name of the angel. And in ancient times, people often believed that if you had the name, then you had some power over people. You had some leverage. And this man, I'm going to call him an angel, did not give Jacob that leverage. He would not do that. Here it's the subtitle up here says Wrestling with God. Here it just says about it's a man, and I'm just going to call the man an angel. Different people would describe what this experience might be like. If you asked someone who was going to do a psychological profile and ignore the biblical religious part here, the story of wrestling with God at night and having to have it finished by daybreak is a good metaphor for the kind of thing that you and I do. If you go to bed with a worry or a concern or something in our minds, often our dreams reflect that. And we wrestle with things. We also wrestle with things emotionally in other ways. And this is sometimes a reference to those things. But here, of course, it was Jacob's real life and not just a symbol. So, verse 30, Jacob called this place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." And Peniel means face of God. So verse 31, the sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So that's his physical legacy after meeting with the angel of the Lord. Chapter 33. Here comes the big moment. Jacob's going to meet Esau, his long-lost brother. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So Jacob divided the children. He's scared. He divides the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children out in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. You can tell which ones were his favorites. Jacob himself went on ahead of that group and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Now, isn't it interesting here? We know the story of what happened during that 20 years with Jacob. We don't know what happened during those 20 years with Esau. Yeah. But clearly, Esau, who had been tricked out of his birthright and his blessing, has still done well, and God has been good to him. And that is a story that we don't know, but clearly the result is that God has been good to Esau. And God has, in the 20 years, helped Esau to forgive his brother for the wrongs he had experienced, and was just glad to see him. So verse 10, Jacob says, "No, please, if I found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God now that you've received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you. For God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. I think Jacob was still wanting to be sure he pacified his brother. You know, he this thing about Esau being forgiving and loving towards him was a new idea to him. So Esau then said, "Let's be on our way. I'll accompany you." Jacob hesitates here. But Jacob said, "Well, I'm hearing him drag this out. My Lord knows that the children are tender, and that I must care for the ewes and the cows that are nursing their young. If they're driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I move along slowly at the pace of the flocks and herds before me, and the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord and Seir." So Esau says, "Well, then let me leave some of my men with you." "But why do that?" Jacob asks. "Let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So on that day, Esau started on his way back to his town of Seir. Jacob, however, who didn't quite trust Esau, I think, completely, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. The root word is for a shelter. That also refers to the festival of Sukkot today. Verse 18, here's sort of the summary. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan, and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, meaning the God of Israel. And this is where Jacob settled with his family, there outside of Shechem. The city of Shechem is still there today. It's located between Mount Ebal on one side and Gerizim on the other. And I think the word Shechem actually is sort of like the word for saddle. So it's like the saddle in between these two hills. It's a historic city. Jacob lived there. And it's not too far from Bethel, which was also, remember, that important place. Today, if you went to Shechem, and you could go and see where Jacob's well is. Of course, like most sites, a church was built over it sometimes centuries ago. And it is a beautiful church on the inside, but you can take a tour down into underneath in this basement area where is the well, and you can dip down and pull water up from this ancient well, even today. So this is where Jacob is spending his life. Now, next time we'll talk about, the next chapter goes on to his son Joseph and the other brothers, and the family story continues. But Jacob is now Israel and will be indeed the father of a great nation, the way God has promised to him. At this point in time, Jacob has 11 sons and a daughter, but it won't be long, and he will have the 12th son who will be born, and they will represent the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jacob, the trickster, the schemer, had to be smart along the way and do some things, but also discovered that he was forgiven for much of that by his brother Esau. And that's a good lesson for us today. Thank you, and God bless.